morning, students. So today in this particular video we will be discussing amebiasis. Now you know that we have completed many other modules, so now we will move on to your protozoan disease. So you know from very early you know that what is a protozoa, what is protozoa, and I think everybody knows that what is entamoeba. So amoeba is that particular protozoan which is pleomorphic. That means they have no specific shape, right? And they basically gather food by the help of pseudopodia, right? And you know there is a theory called gel-sol theory, and that particular formation of gel to solution and solution to gel basically change their morphology, and that will help them to gather food, that is help them for the movement, etc. So we will be discussing one of that type of amoeba, that is your Entamoeba histolytica. Now before I move on to the very details of this particular Entamoeba histolytica, you know that first we need to differentiate that what is your diarrhea and what is your dysentery. Now since we are discussing the disease of your gastrointestinal tract, right? So we have loose motions or diarrhea, and also we say that there is another spectrum, that is your dysentery. Diarrhea is a watery stool, and that is basically being caused by the imbalance of your electrolyte oozing out of the cell into the lumen of the gastrointestinal tract, bringing about your watery stool. But if I talk of dysentery, dysentery is not associated with your watery stool, rather it is associated with your mucoid stool. So one is your watery stool and another is your mucoid stool, right? And you know that when this organism basically invade the surface of the epithelial layer of the gastrointestinal tract, they will start damaging the tissue, and that will result in formation of excessive mucus, and even sometimes you know that they are more invasive and penetrate into the deeper layers of the tissue, resulting in oozing out of the blood, destruction of the tissue and oozing out of the blood and hemorrhage, and that will lead to the oozing out of the blood and your blood dysentery. We call it dysentery, means that mucus and blood mixed with the stool. So that is the basic difference. Now I will move on to the learning objective of this class. Learning objective of this class. So we need to know, because you know that whenever we are studying anything, we should know that why we are doing it, why we are studying it. So first is you need to know the definition. That is very obvious. Next, this is very important, that is you need to know the epidemiology. Okay. The third point, we need to know the epidemiological determinants. Epidemiological determinants. Okay. You will come to know one by one that what it is. There is your clinical presentation. Diagnosis. Prevention. Of course, it's not just prevention, you know, it's also treatment. So definition, epidemiology, epidemiological determinants, clinical presentation, diagnosis, prevention, and treatment. So we will move on to all these things one by one. So before I move on, can you see this image? This particular image is of amoeba. And you know, this is pleomorphic. You didn't get to have any shape of it. And you know that protrusions coming out, and that will protrude to form your pseudopodia, right? So amebiasis is an infection with the intestinal protozoa, which is your Entamoeba histolytica, Entamoeba histolytica. Okay. Now, here I will say some important point that is very important to know. That is 90% of this amebiasis, of this infection, is asymptomatic. Asymptomatic. So I will focus the point. I will highlight the point. Why? Because you know that when in the disease, if the disease becomes asymptomatic, I told you that there are two types of interaction of the host and pathogen. One is when there is no equilibrium between the host and pathogen. Another is when there is equilibrium between the host and the pathogen. So when there is no equilibrium between the host and the pathogen, either the host survives or the pathogen survives, right? So in that case, the host is aware of the fact that the host is suffering from a disease because of the symptoms. But there are many chronic diseases in which the pathogen has established an equilibrium with the host, and that particular disease is asymptomatic. One of the greatest example is the example of typhoid Mary, who has resulted in so many epidemics of typhoid, right? And she was called as Typhoid Mary. Okay, she was Mary Mellon, and she was called as Typhoid Mary because that Salmonella typhi was harboring in her. And she actually used, because she was a carrier, she disseminated the microorganism into the food because she was a cook. So asymptomatic individual is the dangerous. So they can spread the organism to the population without even knowing it, leading to epidemic. So here 90% of the case is asymptomatic, and about 10% produces a spectrum of clinical syndrome. So it produces a spectrum of clinical syndrome. So again, this is not symptoms, this is your syndrome. So there are a set of different kind of symptoms which may arise. Okay. So next we will move on. So from this particular point of view, we will first chalk out the symptomatic group. So let's clear out the board. Okay, so let's start. So first we will talk about the symptomatic group. Symptomatic group. Okay. Now when we talk about this particular symptomatic group is further classified into intestinal, and your extra-intestinal. So symptomatic groups are intestinal and your extra-intestinal. So what do you information do you get from this point? That means we are calling it a gastrointestinal disorder. So it is not just confined to the intestine. It is even moving, it is even an infection of other parts of the body as well. And that is your extra-intestinal, right? So if it is intestinal, it is further classified as small invasive amebiasis. So a small percentage of the population have invasive amebiasis. Right in the very beginning, see, I will relate my class with what I have taught before. So you know that I have talked about toxicity and invasiveness. So a particular organism will have more toxic effect if it is invading the deeper layers of the tissue, if it is more invasive, if it is more fast in invasion. So this is your invasive amebiasis, which enters into the deeper layers of the tissue. Another is your mild discomfort and diarrhea. That means acute fulminating dysentery. So this is not very invasive, but you have the symptoms, acute fulminating dysentery. So you come to know that yes, you have this particular disease, and so you will go for the treatment. Okay. Next, this is your invasion to liver, liver abscess, okay, and even it moves to the brain. Even it moves to the brain and lungs and spleen. Okay, so it moves to the liver, brain, lungs and spleen. So you understand that it can invade various types of organs. Okay. Next comes the third point. Now this third point is very, very important, right? Now this third point is from the epidemiology point of view. So quickly moving on to the third point, that is your epidemiology. So first point in epidemiology is that worldwide it is distributed, and this is your third most common parasitic death. So have you ever thought that it is the third most common parasitic death? People do not take amoebic dysentery seriously. They even have some discomfort, but they don't take medication. So see the consequence, right? It is present in India, China, Mexico, Africa, and your South America, and 2 to 60% prevalence. Okay, based on your ELISA, PCR study and your stool samples. 1 lakh death per year. Okay, 500 million infections. 500 million infections. Okay, so you understand the epidemiology. Next is, the epidemiological determinants. What are the determining factor of your epidemiology? First, what is the agent, right? Next is the virulence factor. So in the next class we will be discussing the virulence factor. The host factor, again the same thing. Some host will have acute symptoms, some host will have your chronic symptoms, means no symptoms at all. Environmental factor. Okay. Mode of transmission. So you need to know the mode of transmission and your incubation period. Okay, so these are all very important points, and this particular I will focus on this incubation period. I will try to focus that what is the difference between infection and disease. Infection means the organism is multiplying in your body and you are unaware of the fact, right? But disease means when the symptoms comes into play, you understand that you are ill, then only that is your disease. So here next is that what agent will basically cause the disease, amebiasis. So I will now focus on this particular picture. See, this particular picture is having two important things. One is your cyst, let's take it over here. One is your cyst, right? Another is your trophozoite. Okay, so I will talk about this cyst and trophozoite in the next class. Just understand that cyst is the inactive form of that particular pathogen, and trophozoite is active in the pathogen, in the organism. It is active form of the pathogen. You know that when a person is suffering from fulminating diarrhea, you will have huge number of trophozoites in his stool, and presence of trophozoite basically confirms amebiasis. Otherwise,